Elon Musk and Tesla have now done something that will change Bitcoin forever. And according to Michael Saylor, the condition for a $5 million price, Elon Musk is pumping up the Tesla stock with Bitcoin. So he's not pumping up the Bitcoin price, but he's using Bitcoin to pump up the Tesla stock. And that's something that's happening here. It's so drastic that it's coming at us now, and it could really change everything. Most people are really sleeping on what's happening right now. At the same time, we see the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund now holding MicroStrategy. The other Bitcoin companies are holding. We're also looking into what that's all about. And pension funds are now also going big into Bitcoin. First, let's take a look at Tesla because there's a rule change happening here. And this rule change is really causing a stir here. We're actually seeing some great news here. Increased due to the new FESP regulation. Tesla increased its Bitcoin holdings and reported a profit of $600 million. As a result, the stock rose by 4.2% in after-hours trading, and the market capitalization increased by nearly $50 billion US dollars. Check this out. Just think about what happens if MicroStrategy goes in with 45 times more Bitcoin following the FESP example. Here it comes. So now we have to understand here what's going on. So right now it's like this. Tesla has been buying Bitcoin for a really long time. It's been about 3 years or so. Yeah, about 3 years. 2-3 years, roughly. But it was always the case that there was no fair value accounting option, where the Bitcoins just recorded at their purchase price, recorded on balance sheet. And what is happening now is because of the fixed regulation, which has now essentially come into force. Tesla can now record its Bitcoin holdings at the current price. That means they had huge unrealized gains, and these unrealized gains are now being accounted for on the balance sheet. And that means that the company, Tesla, profits worth $600 million. They can just record it here. And that leads to a massive increase in market capitalization here of $50 billion. And here the stock goes up, again, for 0.2%. So this is really massive. What's happening right now? This was applied for the first time in Q4. It also says here, Tesla reports a $600 million Bitcoin profit. And that's basically being done for Q4. So not even for the current Bitcoin prices, not even for the very latest Bitcoin price, but for December price. And the really amazing thing is, if we take a look at the chart here, that means before fair value accounting was implemented here, at Tesla, we had a Tesla price of $389. Now they're doing fair value accounting here. What's happening? The price goes up from $389 to $405. And that's just amazing that you can basically pump up the stock just with an accounting trick. And just as was described earlier, Tesla now has some Bitcoin. They're writing here, MicroStrategy has 45 times as many Bitcoins. Just imagine what happens when other companies that aren't doing fair value accounting in the US suddenly start doing it. When they suddenly start doing fair value accounting here. And that's also the reason why. Michael Saylor says this is one of the 3 reasons needed here, to shoot Bitcoin up to $5 million. And the crazy thing is, most people don't even understand what's happening here. That's not quite it. Trivial what's happening here. It's not like, yeah, now some big company is buying in. Bitcoin, Donald Trump is buying Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin, or here the USA buying Bitcoin, the Czech Republic is buying Bitcoin or something. No, this isn't just some trivial news. There are things happening beneath the surface. Basically, it's kind of hidden. And that's what it's always about. Adam Beck says that there is a lot of information asymmetry here at the moment, that a lot of things are happening under the hood that you don't really notice, but they are a massive price driver in the long run. I mean, just imagine when all companies around the world start, here you go, to account for Bitcoin at a fair market price. I mean, Tesla hasn't even accounted for it at a fair market price. Here are the prices from December basically included. It could even be that the prices of Bitcoin are now a few thousand euros higher. Like the price you used here in December. That is the actual value of Tesla if one were to book it at the current time. It would obviously be even higher, but you always have to draw the line somewhere. You can't just apply value accounting every single day, but you do it, kind of quarterly. I don't know, maybe every 3 months or monthly. I'm not really sure how that's done. But you don't do it on a daily basis. You do it at a certain point in time. And they basically did that here in January, and the point where they pulled the price from. That was sometime in December. I don't know exactly what date in December or in Q4 it is. Yeah, it could also be that it was maybe October or November or something. But in the end, this is something you need to keep an eye on. That companies are pumping their own balance sheets through Bitcoin. So normally it was the other way around. That means, for example, companies have pumped Bitcoin by buying Bitcoin. Now it's the other way. Companies are pumping their own stock by simply accounting for the profits here. And that's definitely an effect you need to keep an eye on now. And this here leads to massively rising Bitcoin prices in the long run. At the same time, of course, Bitcoin makes it a lot more attractive. I mean, just look at it this way. Now, Bitcoin is suddenly so much more attractive. I mean, Elon Musk, he's going to be happy about this. Hey, awesome. Now the Bitcoin investment is finally paying off big time, because until now it was just like, yeah, you kind of bought it, but it didn't really reflect in the stock. So then the investors weren't so convinced either. They said, okay, what should we do with that? When we buy Bitcoin here, but the stock isn't going up at all, why should we even support the stock then? And so on. But if you can see that reflected in the stock, then it's definitely a lot more interesting for new companies to implement Bitcoin here. And on top of that, it's obviously better for the investors in that stock. That means we have a win-win-win situation. Good for the companies, good for the investors, and good for Bitcoin. That's the ultimate game changer. And then we had something exciting here. And here it is. The fund of the Norwegian Central Bank announces that it owns MicroStrategy shares worth $500 million US dollars. And that's definitely bullish. I made a video about that. Wow, that must have been a few months ago. I once said, somebody, I think the Swiss National Bank is holding Bitcoin or something like that, written in big letters. But then, of course, came the criticism. And people said, no, they don't hold any Bitcoin at all. Yeah, of course, they don't hold any direct Bitcoin. They hold Bitcoin indirectly. That means they don't have the private keys, but you could definitely say that they hold Bitcoin here. Because if, for example, you buy a Bitcoin ETF or something like that, then you'd say that in casual conversation too. Yes, he now holds Bitcoin. But if you break it down technically, you have to say, no, the Norwegian sovereign fund doesn't actually hold any Bitcoin because he doesn't have any keys. Instead, he's basically just holding MicroStrategy shares, and MicroStrategy shares are a derivative of Bitcoin. That means you're not holding direct Bitcoin. Instead, you're holding Bitcoin indirectly. But that doesn't matter. It's still positive for the Bitcoin price when large sovereign funds buy Bitcoin. But you also have to add that, just like in Switzerland, here, the MicroStrategy investment was basically part of a diversified portfolio, just like it is with the Norwegian sovereign fund, because many people, for example, have said that the Norwegian sovereign fund is specifically investing in MicroStrategy. No, it's something like that here. 0.02% or something like that, which is basically what the allocation is. You really have to picture it. That's a huge sovereign fund. And when a few million get pumped into MicroStrategy, like 500 million, that's not a lot for a sovereign fund. You just have to understand. They just have a market-neutral portfolio, a very broadly diversified portfolio. It's something like an MSCI world, just that they don't build it as broadly as an MSCI world. But they spread it out a bit themselves, and then they just have different tech stocks. Then, of course, MicroStrategy and stuff like that come into play. And you can see it here too. The CEO of Metaplanet was also excited. He says here that Norges Bank, the largest sovereign fund in the world, currently holds a 0.55% stake in Metaplanet. Norges Bank manages assets worth over $1.7 trillion and also holds a 0.72% stake in MicroStrategy, valued at $500 million US dollars. So it wasn't true after all. My number is 0.72%, what they hold in MicroStrategy. Given their size, they have the opportunity to increase their stakes in Metaplanet over time. So they're also assuming that the indirect Bitcoin investments will go up here. And that's exactly the important thing. What's happening is that MicroStrategy is going to be added to the NASDAQ. Would, not will, but would. And where maybe MicroStrategy will soon be added to the S&P 500. Because we just have indirect. Their capital is basically flowing into MicroStrategy, bringing indirect capital into Metaplanet. Because Metaplanet is also included in big sovereign funds, pension funds here. In the sovereign wealth fund here from Norway, basically included. Because here you can see that, for example, even central banks that just aren't into Bitcoin. For example, like in Switzerland or something, that they also invest in Bitcoin. That means whether you want to or not. These days, people are almost always investing in Bitcoin. So if you're, for example, a big sovereign fund, then you basically have. Bitcoin is just part of a broadly diversified portfolio when you invest indirectly in any Bitcoin companies. Or when you buy the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is indirectly invested in Bitcoin again. If you're a regular company or just an average person, Bitcoin hates, then maybe buy the NASDAQ or by me. What do I know? Any other index in MSCI world, and is then basically invested in Bitcoin. So that's basically the game theory that's happening here. That you can't avoid Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin will automatically become more and more a part of the everyday life of regular investors. Will be part of saving, part of the economic cycle of the financial industry. And it's really, really interesting to see, and it's also important to mention again, that all of this is happening beneath the surface. Most people don't get it here. What's happening is that it's basically not like that. So in your face, hey, Bitcoin is somehow up 20 now. $1,000 in a day or something. Now we have this big state buying Bitcoin. No, we have a ton of little things happening in the background that are really forming a strong fund here. So we always have to look at what the foundation of Bitcoin is, right? So we can definitely break out in price in a big way, but if there's no solid fund backing it up, we'll also drop back down pretty quickly. And what's really happening here with all the news in the background and so on, that's basically the groundwork and the foundation. What's being set up now to potentially break out upwards. But of course, looking at the long term, over 10 years, 20 years, and much more. And now I've also found an amazing projection here. And there are more and more pension funds that want to buy Bitcoin here. So pension funds. Arthur Drank sent this to me. He writes here based on, according to current data, the total financial assets of US pension funds amount to about 27.9 trillion US dollars. A reserve of 1% of this amount equals 279 billion US dollars, while 5% equals 1.39 billion US dollars. And now the question is, okay, hey, what happens when these big pension funds allocate their capital into Bitcoin? And they're not going to throw in 10%, they probably won't even put in 5%, but 1% over the next 5 years, that a large portion of the pension funds reinvest in Bitcoin isn't that far-fetched. And here's the current Bitcoin price. It was 103,000 US dollars. That might be a bit different right now. And now pay attention, this results in a reserve of 1%. So if all these pension funds here in the U.S, the whole thing, 1% of their assets, putting money into Bitcoin here, and just to reiterate, 279 billion US dollars. Then, according to stocks, current price is just under 2.7 million Bitcoin, which pension funds would buy here with a 1% allocation. If we go for a 5% allocation, then it's 1.39 million that would flow into Bitcoin. So almost as much as the current market capitalization. Of course, it's a bit less, but it's still pretty close. Then they are here, 13.5 million Bitcoin. And that's just totally mind-blowing. We also need to be clear about the numbers, that there's slippage here. So that means if people were to put like 1% into Bitcoin, then of course the Bitcoin price would rise. They wouldn't be able to get that many Bitcoins. So according to the current price, it's 2.7 million Bitcoin, which could create buying pressure from these pension funds. But that's only at the current price. If they keep reallocating constantly, then the Bitcoin price will be at 200,000 or even 300,000 and so on. And then they end up getting fewer and fewer Bitcoins. So a realistic number would probably be half of that, maybe at most 1 million Bitcoins or so. It's just like with MicroStrategy and all those other companies. And so they're buying Bitcoin now. But they keep pouring in more money, but with more money, you can buy fewer and fewer Bitcoins, because at the same time, the Bitcoin price is rising. So either you have very, very little money and you get in really early, which allows you to build up large allocations. Or the later you get in, the more money you theoretically need to build the same allocations that you could have built maybe 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, you somehow got 1,000, would have been enough. And then you could buy a massive amount of Bitcoin. Today you come with 1,000. Those don't get you far. Today you just need 1 million or a few million to build up massive Bitcoin holdings here. And that's basically the crazy thing that's happening right now. And folks, if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll drop a link down below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can simply buy Bitcoin. This is about the Bitcoin code. Up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. See you folks. See you later. Peace out.